A big boost for retailers as sales figures grow at their fastest rate for 14 years. They rose by more than 7% last month, boosted by cold weather clothing sales and Halloween. The figures suggest consumer confidence hasn't been dented by the uncertainty surrounding Brexit, also this lunchtime. The Justice Secretary is urged to reduce the number of prisoners being held for many years longer than their minimum term. Car insurance could fall dramatically if the government goes ahead with plans to clamp down on whiplash compensation claims. Eyewitnesses tell a court how the man accused of murdering MP Jo Cox waved a knife at them and told them to stay back as he attacked her. Losing Your Way, the new video game that could eventually be used to diagnose Alzheimer's.
In the south, hands off our NHS. Protests over the cuts plan to plug a funding gap of almost £500 million. And reprieve for Portland. The helicopter's going, but there's still a future for the base.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Retail sales jumped to their highest level in 14 years last month, suggesting that consumer confidence remains strong despite the uncertainty of Brexit. Sales figures were more than 7% higher than this time last year, boosted by clothing sales because of colder temperatures and supermarkets benefiting from Halloween. It was the fastest year-on-year growth since 2002. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports.
It was supposed to be a frightening harbinger of economic doom. But far from giving us the fear, the prospect of Brexit now looks like it's stimulated us to shop like we never have before, with a little help from Halloween.
I'm a shopaholic. Spending as normal.
We have got slightly stricter budgets in place for this year, but there's sort of general reasons for that, just being a bit more sensible, really.
No plans to cut back this year, no.
Anybody's waiting to pay, please?
Retailers have succeeded in turning Halloween into an event like Easter, and customers are buying into it. On top of that, cold weather has stimulated sales of warm winter clothing.
What we've seen in particular is some stronger sales in the food sector coming from Halloween sales, where Halloween sales have been above average in comparison to previous years, and also in the clothing sector, where a mild September put off a lot of consumer purchases, which were then brought into the month of October. So we've seen quite strong sales within the clothing sector this month.
Sales in October were up 7.4% compared with the same month a year ago, the biggest annual jump since 2002. And on the internet, they jumped 27%, the strongest growth in 5 years. The pound reacted to the numbers by jumping a cent to more than $1.25 before falling back slightly.
Half the country is in a very positive state of mind. They've voted for change. They have voted for a new beginning. And what better way is there than to change your wardrobe and to actually go out and buy some clothes and some shoes? And most of the people are not feeling the inflationary pain that is yet to come.
The sales numbers will help to lay to rest fears, not least those of the government and Bank of England, that a Brexit vote would do immediate damage to consumer confidence. But there is a concern. Sales are now rising much faster than earnings. If that continues, the economic ghosts of the past, like record consumer borrowing, may return to haunt us.
And Andy is with me now. The retailers will be pleased, but are these levels, these spending levels, sustainable?
Well, on one level it's good because you've got economic growth and that means tax receipts roll in, etc. But your question is exactly on the point. When you have sales going up by 7.4%, but earnings are only going up by 2.4%, how do you square that circle? How do you make up the difference? And the answer probably is borrowing. And it's quite worrying, the levels of household borrowing that we've got at the moment. £1.5 trillion is the amount households have borrowed in this country. And it keeps on going up, not least because interest rates are so low. It had gone up by about £1,000 a year, the amount we were borrowing on unsecured loans, even before the Brexit vote. Since then, the Bank of England has cut interest rates and made it even cheaper to borrow. And the thing is that these habits, shopping and borrowing, were what got us into trouble in the first place. So there will be a concern that if we carry on spending more than we're earning, we'll run into the same sort of trouble again.
Andy Verity, thank you. The Chief Inspector of Prisons is demanding immediate action to cut the number of offenders being held beyond their minimum term. Peter Clark says more than 3,000 people given sentences of imprisonment for public protection are being held beyond the expiry date of their tariff. The Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, is due to meet the Prison Officers Association this afternoon to discuss their concerns. It comes as images emerged of inmates at a jail in Dorset apparently taking drugs and drinking alcohol. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
James Ward set light to his mattress in prison while finishing a sentence for assaulting someone. He was given another 10 months behind bars. That was 10 years ago. He's still in prison and his family are campaigning for his release. Because he was sentenced for public protection, he's got to prove he's safe before he's let out. In a letter to the BBC read here for him, he described the effect on his life.
I wake up every morning scared of what the day might hold. I can't see no end to my sentence. I've got no fight left in me anymore. I'm rotting in the prison system.
James has got no hope, and it's hard to, keep reassuring and keep giving hope when you're losing it yourself. Nobody wants to take responsibility for these prisoners. So really, James is at an all-time. It's not nice. It's not nice.
James Ward is far from the only one. By the time the law was changed, 8,711 public protection sentences had been handed down. This year, more than 3,800 are still in custody, and more than 1,000 are 5 years over their minimum sentence. Why? Underfunding and poor admin, according to the prison's inspector, who points out some inmates can't get onto the courses they need to do before being released. He says only the Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, can do anything about this.
I don't mean to be cynical here. I've been a public servant for coming on for 40 years and I've seen lots of units set up. And sometimes they've succeeded in what they were trying to do, sometimes they haven't. What's needed here is very clear leadership.
Run! 10,000 prison officers walked out this week in protest at the prison problems. The Justice Secretary has already accepted they need help.
That's why I've committed the additional staffing, and we're already seeing new staff being recruited. That's why we're dealing with drugs in our prison and phones and drones, and I want them to work with me to make our prisons places that are not just safe, but also places where offenders get reformed.
With words like meltdown being used to describe what's going on, Liz Truss will meet the Prison Officers Association later. Tom Simons, BBC News.
A taxi driver has told the Old Bailey that the man he saw stab and repeatedly shoot the Labour MP Joe Cox threatened to turn on him if he intervened. Other witnesses told the court that after the attack, Thomas Mair, who's 53, walked away with not a care in the world. Mr Mair denies murder. Our correspondent Sarah Campbell is at the Old Bailey for us now. Sarah.
Well, Sophie, this is the second day of evidence, and as you say, eyewitnesses describing what they saw and heard on that June day when Joe Cox was repeatedly stabbed and shot. The eyewitnesses described the attack happened quickly, that they didn't know what was going on, but several of them remarked that as the MP lay dying, the man who'd killed her walked calmly away.
Joe Cox's parents on the right of screen and her sister on the left have been in court every day of the trial so far and have had to listen to graphic eyewitness accounts of the MP's violent death. The 41-year-old mother of two was killed in the centre of Birstall, a small town near Leeds, around 1 o'clock on June the 16th. The jury has been shown CCTV footage of Mrs Cox arriving in her car to hold a constituency surgery. In the taxi behind the MP's car was driver Rashid Hussain. Today in court, he described challenging the man who he'd seen stabbing the MP 5 or 6 times. The man pointed the knife at him and said, "Move back, otherwise I'm going to stab you." After the man had shot the MP, Mr Hussain said he'd heard him say, "Britain first." In Birstall Library that day, waiting to meet Joe Cox, was David Honeybell. On hearing a loud noise outside, Mr Honeybell described what he saw from the library entrance. He told the court he just stood over her, cocked his gun and blasted her. He was asked by Richard Whittam QC what the man had then done. He said he just walked away with not a care in the world. He just walked away. The man arrested less than a mile away from the library in connection with the killing was Thomas Mair. He denies the charges against him, including the murder of Joe Cox.
Well, 9 eyewitnesses have given their account so far today, often emotional, and what they saw in lunchtime, at lunchtime that day. Now, Julie Holmes, just before the lunch break, she works in a local cake shop, and she gave her evidence. She said that after she'd seen the man shoot the MP, she said he looked me in the eye and lifted the gun as in a gesture that he knew I was there. She ran behind the counter, dragging a customer with her, frightened that he would come towards them. The case continues.
Sarah Campbell, thank you. Hillary Clinton has made her first public appearance since being beaten to the White House by Donald Trump. She was speaking at a children's charity event in Washington where she paid tribute to the charity's founder. She also admitted how difficult the past week has been for her.
Now, I will admit, coming here tonight wasn't the easiest thing for me. There have been a few times this past week when all I wanted to do was just to curl up with a good book or our dogs and never leave the house again. I know many of you are deeply disappointed about the results of the election. I am too, more than I can ever express. But as I said last week, our campaign was never about one person or even one election. It was about the country we love and about building an America that is hopeful, inclusive, and big-hearted.
Hillary Clinton speaking in Washington last night. Millions of motorists could see insurance premiums fall after the government announced plans to crack down on whiplash claims. It wants to cap compensation payments, which could see the average payout drop from more than £1,800 to just £425. Our personal finance correspondent Simon Gompertz reports.
There's no doubt accidents can cause whiplash, as these crash tests show. But it's the claims industry which has grown up around whiplash which is causing concern.
I've been pretty much pursued on a kind of twice-weekly basis with insurance companies or claims companies saying, "Oh, I heard you had an accident, would you like to claim?"
I had an ambulance come and I had hospital records and that, and they knew that I was genuine, but there are some people that are not.
Among those trying it on are the crash for cash fraudsters, like the one in front here, stopping deliberately in order to create a claim.
It can't be right that we have, since 2000, seen double the number of personal injury claims, while road traffic accidents have nearly halved. So we want to see an insurance system that works for everyone, not just those who abuse it.
Insurers are offering a deal. Get rid of the spurious claims and they'll take £40 off the cost of motor insurance. The typical whiplash payout is £1,850. The government proposes either capping that at £425 or scrapping the right to compensation altogether. But there are questions about all of this, whether the insurers will really pass on the savings and whether it's fair for a genuine whiplash claimant to have their compensation restricted.
We think that it's purely the insurance companies' profits that are going to benefit. There are lots of other areas we think the insurance companies should be looking at, but they shouldn't turn their fire on innocent, injured people.
What sort of symptoms have you experienced in the neck so far?
Treatment will still be covered along with loss of earnings, but ministers say they're cracking down on a rampant compensation culture. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
Premier League clubs are considering allowing football supporters to go back to the days when they could stand at matches. Fully seated stadiums have been compulsory in the top 2 divisions of English football since the Hillsborough tragedy. But a trial of so-called safe standing areas has been taking place at Celtic's ground. Our correspondent Richard Conway has more.
For decades, it was a site that was an integral part of English football. But since the 1989 Hillsborough tragedy and subsequent Taylor report, top-flight clubs have been required to convert their terracing into seating. Meeting today, Premier League chairmen are to discuss standing for the first time.
How are you, all right?
Some Premier League sides want to explore so-called safe standing in the form of rail seating. This season, Scottish champions Celtic have installed just under 3,000 rail seats, which can be locked in position, allowing fans an individual space to stand. Scottish clubs are not subject to the same law as their English counterparts, which allowed Celtic to apply to Glasgow City Council to remove their seats and install the new system.
I think fans are getting what they wanted in terms of providing a service to them, and very importantly, from the club's perspective, increase the safety of our spectators and at the same time meets the demand of what they want.
Celtic have now given their supporters a choice about whether they want to sit or to stand. Now, proponents of safe standing say that it really helps to improve the atmosphere within stadiums, and that's something the Premier League clubs are very interested in. But the echoes of what happened in Sheffield some 27 years ago, well, they can still be heard. While standing was not the cause of the Hillsborough disaster, English football clubs remain sensitive to the tragedy, and a group representing victims' families are opposed to any change.
I'm very disappointed that, we still haven't got justice, and yet, the Premier Leagues are discussing a backward step. Very, very disappointed in them. I know not all the clubs are looking for this, and I hope they just shout out.
Safe standing is already popular in Germany with clubs such as Borussia Dortmund, but despite the changes to English stadiums, many fans continue not to use their seat, preferring instead to stand.
We're both Liverpool fans and remember Hillsborough so well, so it's a little bit nervous to say to bring it back, but with the right restrictions it could well work.
Bringing it back, the atmosphere is better, enjoying the game, it obviously gets the team riled up, you enjoy it much more, yeah, definitely.
English fans will have to wait though. Discussions are at an early stage and an amendment to the existing law would be needed to allow any return to standing. Richard Conway, BBC News.
The time is just after 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. A big boost for retailers as sales figures grow at their fastest rate for 14 years. And still to come, falling prices at the turnstiles as the cost of going to a top-flight football match drops.
And in South today, leave our health services alone. Protest as NHS bosses plan cuts aimed at plugging a funding gap of almost £500 million. And dragging broadband out of the Jurassic Age, the new microwave mast that's got this community connected.
Reports from the Syrian city of Aleppo say government forces have significantly intensified their assault on rebel-held neighbourhoods in the east of the city. There's been increased artillery fire and air attacks, and rescue workers there say that 100 people were killed yesterday, with more casualties in the latest attacks today. Christian Fraser reports.
There is a feeling among observers that we're moving towards a major military offensive in eastern Aleppo. There had been a 3-week pause in the bombing, but it resumed again on Tuesday, and now there are reports of major troop build-up around the besieged areas in the east. So let's show you how it looks on the ground. You'll see in purple the rebel-held areas, there you go, surrounded by a sea of government control in green. The UN estimates there were 275,000 people trapped in the east, and among them about 8,000 rebel fighters, which include the remnants of the Al-Qaeda group Al-Nusra. Now, I've marked on the map, and there is Aleppo in relation to Damascus, but I've marked the areas that have been hit in the last 24, 48 hours. And there's a feeling the regime are trying to degrade the last remaining basic services. So the Bayan Children's Hospital was hit again, and also a blood bank close to it. But the important thing to note is that this road here, the Castello Road, was sealed off in July. That was the last humanitarian corridor into the east of the city, and since then no aid has gone in, not since the summer, and last week the last food parcels inside the east were handed out. This is what Jan Egeland, the special envoy to the UN, said: "I've not seen a place where there's been so much politicization, so much manipulation of aid as we've seen in recent months. It has to stop." Can it stop? Well, of course, these three people are key, but you'd have to say there's no sign that Russia is relenting. In fact, quite the reverse. They've just moved in their flagship, the General Kuznetsov, into the eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Syria. Important to say that these fighters were not involved in the bombing of eastern Aleppo this week. Instead, they've been hitting jihadist targets in Idlib and Homs. But the President-elect Donald Trump did speak to President Putin on Monday. Of course, he has a different view on this to President Obama. He doesn't believe in regime change in the Middle East. The thing to say is that the very next day after he'd spoken to President Putin, the bombing resumed. Is that significant? We'll have to see.
Christian Fraser there. Well, it was a year ago today that the first Syrian refugees arrived at Glasgow Airport under the Syrian resettlement programme. The UK government has promised to take in 20,000 people by 2020, so far more than 3,000. So far, More than 3,000 have arrived. A third of those have been resettled in Scotland, and our correspondent Lorna Gordon has been to meet one family.
Slowly, no rush.
The newest coaching recruits to a community football club in Aleppo. It's a game they played back in Syria before war forced them from their homes.
Good.
Now a chance to get back on the pitch and give something back to the area that has taken them in.
I am very thankful. They made us feel safe and provided us with everything we needed. Playing football is my hobby. When I came here and received that warm welcome, I decided to help train their kids.
The community club relies on volunteers, so they're happy for the extra help.
We certainly want them to be integrated and get involved in it. And it sends a message to the community as well to say, look, these families are here, we understand the circumstances they've come from, let's make an effort to try and welcome them.
Over the past year, more than 3,000 Syrians have arrived in Britain under the UK government's resettlement programme, prioritising those with urgent medical needs, survivors of violence, women and children. This family had been living in what had been an ISIS-controlled part of Syria. Years of conflict and bombing drove them to a refugee camp where they were selected to come to Britain.
You can't imagine how frightening it was. It was very scary. You could be sleeping and the next thing you know is the ceiling falling on you. The entire building could collapse in a matter of seconds.
They are grateful their children are now safe, but do worry about their relatives left behind.
It is safe here and the law protects you. My children are safe at school where no one could harm them. I can't deny that I miss my home country, but the sense of safety and security here is making it up for me.
From the smallest councils like Clackmannanshire to the cities, in Scotland almost every local authority has housed Syrians as part of this scheme. But across Britain, the number of councils willing or able to help is much more varied, in part because of pressure on housing or schools.
Do you like cheese?
For these families, the aim now is to improve their English, get jobs. They say they want to do all they can to become part of this community, which has taken them in. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Clackmannanshire.
The world's largest dementia research experiment, which takes the form of a video game, has uncovered how the brain's ability to navigate declines throughout life. Getting lost is one of the early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Researchers believe the game could eventually be used to diagnose the condition. James Gallagher reports.
There was once a boy who lived by the sea.
This is the world's biggest dementia experiment in the form of a video game. Sea Hero Quest is a nautical adventure to reclaim an old sailor's lost memories. A touch of a smartphone screen sails a boat round desert islands and icy oceans. The game anonymously records the player's sense of direction and navigational ability.
In faraway seas, they found incredible creatures.
When we launched the application in the app stores, we hoped by the end of the year we'd have 100,000 people take part. And so to reach 2.4 million people taking part has been overwhelming. It's made a big difference to the research.
More than 850,000 people have dementia in the UK. Many people will have had the disease for more than a decade before obvious symptoms like memory loss appear. But losing your sense of direction is an early warning sign.
One by one, his memories were lost.
The results presented at the Neuroscience 2016 conference show for the first time that our sense of direction falls consistently after our teenage years. They also found that men had a slightly better sense of direction than women, and that Nordic nations were the best in the world. It's hoped the game could eventually be used to help spot dementia earlier and get people treatment before it's too late. James Gallagher, BBC News.
Barack Obama has arrived in Germany on the last leg of his final foreign tour as president. He'll meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel later today. The meeting comes after she made it clear in the wake of Donald Trump's election that respect for liberal values was a precondition for Berlin's continued good relations with Washington. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill sent this report.
In a country that values stability, everything's up in the air. This is Germany's Old West, a town once home to a US Army base. They're proud of the American link, but few here are cheering now.
We don't know much about American politics, but when I hear that he wants to build a wall at the Mexican border and what he thinks about women and black people, I think it could be difficult in the future.
I'm very interested to see what's in store for America's women. He made sexist comments during the campaign. I don't understand how women can go out and vote for such a man.
A lot's changed since world leaders gathered in Germany last year. Barack Obama still calls Angela Merkel his closest international ally. His final visit to Germany marks the end of a warm transatlantic partnership and the start of a new political era. Donald Trump's victory was greeted with widespread and undisguised horror here in Germany. One minister described it as a nightmare from which we can't wake up. But shock is turning to pragmatism as Berlin seeks to establish ties with the new administration. Their concern now, they don't know what Donald Trump really thinks about foreign policy. Neither do they know where he stands on Germany and Europe. Few Germans trust Donald Trump. No one knows what he'll mean for defence, the environment, or Angela Merkel's position as mediator between Russia and the West. And America is Germany's biggest trading partner.
Time will tell. The election campaign isn't real politics. Trump is the president-elect of the US. I'm sure he'll want to be a good president, so we have to be optimistic and wait for him to change.
His victory could influence Germany's own shifting domestic politics, perhaps fuel support for the populist AfD party ahead of next year's general election.
Thankfully, there is no charismatic figure with such momentum in such an election campaign anywhere in Germany. Nevertheless, I fear that AfD is going to become a permanent force to reckon with, because they are doing exactly the same thing. They offer simple formulas and pretend to have the answers to complex problems, but they don't.
Angela Merkel has urged Donald Trump to respect shared values. Officially, Germany will wait and see, though experience compels many here to fear the worst. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Bamberg.
The cost of going to a Premier League football match has come down this season, with some away ticket prices now cheaper than in the Championship. The BBC's survey into the price of football has looked at ticket prices at more than 200 clubs, as well as the costs associated with going to matches. Natalie Perks reports.
Programmes, pies, cuppers. It's the little things that add up for a football supporter.
£6 please, mate. Thank you.
But this season, for once, the cost of tickets is helping fans' wallets. Almost 3/4 of football tickets across England and Scotland have either been reduced or frozen since last season. Those numbers helped massively by Premier League clubs agreeing to cap away ticket prices to £30. But after the bumper TV deal, clubs are around £30 million better off. So could they do more?
They could afford, in the Premier League, to let every single fan in free for every game and still have as much money as they had under the previous deal.
What about those who support teams outside of the top flight?
For the first time, an away ticket at 19 of the 24 Championship clubs is now either the same price or more expensive than the Premier League. Here at QPR, the most expensive away ticket will set you back £34, but they're not even the worst offenders. At Sheffield Wednesday, it could cost fans up to £42.
And clubs are still hitting fans in the pockets when it comes to shirts, especially parents. The price of replica shirts in England is up 2%, with Premier League junior shirts averaging almost £40 now. Parents are feeling the pinch of keeping future fans coming to games.
2 adults and 2 children, £99. So yeah, it's too expensive.
It's a £15 for a 3-year-old. I think when I were a kid, it was free.
But clubs are also businesses, and entertainment has a price.
Just to look at one element and say, well, they could let fans in for free here.
I think fans are. It's a bit more complicated. It's a bit more nuanced in terms of what fans actually want from their football clubs. They want accessible pricing, but they also want to see the top players there.
The Premier League says clubs value fans and appreciate their support. Every season that passes, though, is another test of that loyalty. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
England's cricketers got off to a good start on the first day of the second test in India. They took 2 early wickets, but it was hard work for the rest of the day. India reached 317 for 4, with Virat Kohli scoring 151 not out. Stuart Broad and James Anderson took the wickets. Tea was taken early when an errant dog interrupted play and refused to leave the pitch, even when a shoe was aimed in its direction. Let's have a look at the weather now with John Hammond. Hi.
Hi Sophie, and from the heat of India to this. Yes, many of us have been running for cover over the last few hours. Some torrential rain has been sweeping its way across England and Wales in a narrow band, but that rain has really meant business. Here it comes, and it's moving its way west to east. Locally, the rain has had some impacts. It's now pushing into eastern counties of England, but not just rain. We've had reports of a couple of tornadoes, at least across parts of mid-Wales and also into the northwest Midlands. Locally, some destructive winds over the last few hours, all in association with that squally front, which will give a brief dollop of rain across the southeast as we head into the afternoon. Behind that, it turns colder as we head into the night. Already the showers across the Highlands are falling as snow, and snow down to lower and lower levels as we head into the night across northern parts of the UK. Ice could be an issue. Warnings are in force. Temperatures close to or even below freezing. Rain showers mostly at this stage across southern areas. But even here, as we go into tomorrow, the potential for a bit of the white stuff mixed into the showers. But the impactful snowfall will be further north again, mostly up over the high ground, where that snow will accumulate. Most of the showers out west exposed to that brisk and chilly westerly wind. Best of the sunshine, arguably the further east you are. But wherever you are tomorrow, it'll feel cold, colder than today, even with temperatures, 4 or 5 degrees for much of the day. And when those showers come along, they'll fall by several degrees. Into the weekend then. We've got plans for Saturday, not looking too bad actually. Fewer showers, probably lighter winds. There will still be some showers, and they will be wintry across the north, and temperatures will be pretty low in most places. Now, if you've been watching our broadcast over the last few days, we've been keeping a very close eye on the potential for quite a nasty area of low pressure to bring some impactful weather to our shores as we go through the second half of this weekend. Now, at this stage, it does look as if rain could have the greatest impact. Turns very wet indeed, we think, on Sunday across the more southern and eastern parts of the UK, particularly England and Wales. Bit of snow on the northern edge, but rain will be the main player, we think. Much of Scotland and Northern Ireland probably escaping the worst of this. Bright and crisp and sunny with a few showers. Now, there was the potential for some really damaging winds with this system. It now looks as if the worst of the winds will stay to the south of us, could fringe onto the south coast, but it's mostly northern France, we think, which will bear the brunt of the strongest of the winds. But it's an evolving situation. It's not nailed on, and still there's less of a chance that the system will be further north, and that brings the potential for some of those really strong winds to affect the more southern and eastern areas. We'll keep an eye on that. But as we go to the early part of next week, again, another system comes up from the southwest, potentially bringing some more heavy and persistent rain, especially across the south and east. Sophie.
Get the umbrellas out, John. Yep. Thank you. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. A big boost for retailers as sales figures grow at their fastest rate for 14 years. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.